Welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. Today's guest is Marc Allera, the CEO of the BT Consumer Division. He's a bit of a different guest for Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. Normally we're talking to entrepreneurs. But it was amazing to sit down with Marc and talk about how he manages tens of thousands of people and where he thinks the future of telecommunications is going. What was particularly interesting talking to Marc was his views on the creation of jobs in sport and football, in particular the production jobs that go into behind these, and where he thinks the consumption of sport and football is changing. This episode was done in partnership with BT. If you want to see how you can partner with Jimmy's Jobs of the Future, check out our website at www.jobsofthefuture.co. Marc, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
So tell us, what is your job?
Well, I'm the CEO of the consumer division of BT Group, which means I run the EE mobile network, which is obviously very well known for mobile.
Yep.
BT, which is better known for broadband. Most people who've got a broadband connection will know us. We've got a TV business. We've got a sports business that I run as well, which is a joint venture that we've created with Warner Brothers and Discovery. We've got 25 million subscribers up and down the UK, so we're the largest consumer business in the country and the largest subscription business in the country. So it's a big old team. We've got around 20,000 people in the consumer team all over the country, in stores, contact centres, head office roles everywhere. And our customers spend about £10 billion a year with us. So it's a big part of the group. Yeah.
BT is a British institution, literally in the name at one point. How's it changed over the course of the last few years?
I think it's changed a huge amount. I mean, if you ask a lot of people 20 years ago, you ask them about BT, most people would have said phone boxes and landlines and possibly a broadband connection. I think now there's such variety in the portfolio of the companies. There's the EE mobile business, which is an enormous company that was brought into and now part of BT Group. We've got a sports business, a TV business, media business. Our infrastructure division in Openreach is rolling out the digital infrastructure for the next probably 50 to 100 years for the UK, full fibre optic broadband going to everyone's homes. And I think as a company, it is shifting a lot from a engineering, data, very analytical led culture to putting customers much more at the heart of what it does, which is a big shift for an organisation as big as BT. I mean, BT's got over 100,000 people. So it can be an oil tanker at times, trying to change direction or change culture. But I can feel a lot of pace and energy moving in the company now.
And when we first spoke, you just come back from Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, which is a huge event, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on more broadly. And the big theme there this year was AI, and obviously it's been one of these developments with ChatGPT 4 coming out this week when we're recording. What impact do you think that's going to have on the future of jobs, and also on the future of networks, right? Because people are putting a huge amount of data through these platforms. How's that going to fare?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was a big theme at this Congress, which for those that maybe don't know what it is, this is the sort of annual coming together of networks, software platforms, chip manufacturers, networks, device manufacturers. It's an enormous conference where over 100,000 people descend into Barcelona and talk tech and talk developments in our industry. And last year, interestingly, all the talk was about the metaverse. That was the only thing you could talk about, and the only thing everyone was talking about.
Yeah.
And this year, I would say there was no talk of the metaverse, apart from in the Meta stand. But lots of people talking about AI, and but I do think it feels like it's much more than just a buzzword and a thing of the moment. When I look at across the value chain of our industry, from the chip manufacturers, the semiconductor people, the equipment manufacturers that create the equipment that powers our networks, device manufacturers, software players. Everybody's talking about how AI is going to be incorporated into their products and services. And you're absolutely right. What this means is there's going to be a massive incremental demand on processing power, effectively the engine that powers the technology. When you're talking billions of instances of search terms and pieces of code that need to be generated and turned into answers for people. That means a massive demand on processing power, and that cannot all be handled by more data centers. That needs to be put into networks and semiconductors and hardware and software. And I think no one's really yet thought through how, because it's going to place massive demands on what we call edge networks, where you push the network closer to the customer. Massive demands on processing power and data centers. And I think everybody's thinking that through at the moment. I think the technology is exciting and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
Personally.
What excites you about it?
I think what excites me about it is how the efficiency that it could create in any business and how that could help customers. So deploying that technology, and we already deploy some of that technology already to spot problems in our networks. Particularly when the teams are sleeping overnight, the machines are working and picking up problems and adjusting them and making changes without human beings necessarily needing to be involved, or answering questions for consumers and helping them get to the answers quickly and easily. So it's a very powerful technology, I think, deployed in the right way. I think the thing that terrifies me about it, and I don't think anyone's really delving into the consequences of what happens if somebody types into one of these engines a question like, how do I commit suicide? Is underage sex a good thing? Or how do I do this? Or how do I do that? What answers are you going to get? And where do those answers come from? And how do you know the provenance, the quality of the sourcing of the answers you're getting? And who's responsible for all of that? And how is that going to be monitored and regulated? And we've already got big problems, as we all know, on our social media platforms, and this is that on steroids.
Yeah.
And I really do. So I think there's a huge amount of excitement, and as there always is in new technology. But I think really thinking through how it should be responsibly used is the job that many people need to really start upping the ante on.
And how do you think the best way to go about that would be? Because it's right, you raised some terrifying examples there of what could happen and what it could be used for. How do regulators go about bringing safeguards in around this issue?
Well, generally, in consultation with industry, but I think the challenge with regulation is it tends to come into force much later than the technology's been deployed.
Yeah,
and so it's dealing with a lot of retrospective issues that are built for some time. And of course, because of the pace of technology now, something's launched and you're 3, 4, 5 years into it. There's an online harms bill, for example, that's recently got a lot of focus, but that's a significant number of years after social media platforms and all kinds of other online platforms are out there with billions of interactions on them and lots of issues being realized. So I've got a lot of sympathy for regulators because it's a very complex issue, and you need to get all of the facts and listen to all parties that are part of the system. But regulators alone can't solve it, and I think there is a huge responsibility on the part of companies to solve these issues, and have a culture that says the safety and the quality of the information we're providing needs to be the very best it can be.
One of the things that you've raised is BT becoming a lot more consumer focused, and it does feel like one of the sort of general trends is that all citizens now have a voice on issues like that we've just discussed in terms of they have a voice on it. But how does BT kind of become more customer focused, as you were saying earlier? Because like you say, you've got a huge amount of them. That's more than any other business in the UK. How do you remain customer focused at that scale?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it comes from the top. I think myself, my leadership team, you have to have a belief that serving people well, serving your customers well, will be good for business. And our market is incredibly competitive. There are so many choices that customers have got. Whilst we're a very large player, every day we have to fight for the right to keep our customers or attract new customers. So we also recognise that I think good words and bad words travel faster than ever to more and more people about how well companies treat you.
Yeah.
And so you can't build a brand or shape a brand or deliver a successful brand through advertising anymore. It's through experience and doing what you say you're going to do. So I think it comes from a core belief from myself and my leadership team that customers are important, that doing everything we can to serve them is really key. Not accepting average levels of quality of service has been a big thing for us. We haven't historically had the best brand and reputation for service. If you go back probably 10 years, I'd say where we are now is a much better place, but there's still a lot of improvements we need to make. We've got the lowest complaints in the industry, the customer satisfaction levels that are very high, and they certainly weren't there a few years ago, but it's not a job you can ever say is done.
Yeah, but how did you do that? Because you've been chief exec 5 years now, so
Yep.
a big portion
Yep.
of that sort of turnaround of it. How did you go about doing that? I mean, I take it comes from the top, but I think it's very interesting for listeners of this podcast. We tend to have sort of a lot of entrepreneurs sort of who
Yeah.
can be nimble and very reactive to that, can probably
Yeah.
almost, at the beginning, they will know all their customers by name. It's a bit more of a
Yeah,
challenge
yeah.
for you at
No,
sort
that's
of
right.
25 million. Like how do you sort of go about kind of bringing in that change?
I think you've got to be really systematic about it. I mean, quite often we get asked, or I get asked, what's the one or two things you've done? And the reality is it's thousands of little things all adding up. It's getting the data, knowing and understanding which products and services and channels and experiences or journeys that aren't working, having the data to do that, and then having a systematic process that addresses all of those issues one by one, and knowing that you can't fix it all overnight, making sure you've got investment to address those issues, making sure they're a priority. I think creating a culture where it's quite often in a business like ours that's very big and very functional, I suppose. You have a service department or a sales department or a marketing department. It's making customer service feel like it's everyone's job, not just the customer service team's job, and I think that's something we've really done a good job on across the team, is jointly owning customer experience. And if you're building a product or running a product, you feel as accountable for it as the service team or anyone else.
I think it's really interesting because I think the sort of little decisions are really quite important, and you're taking sort of 10 dozens of them a day, and actually there's often a tendency to be like, well, we've got to get the big calls right and so on, and of course that's true, but actually you're right that there's, particularly in something like a customer journey, there's loads of sort of different touch points, as they say, on that, and it can be it can be a real challenge to get them right. One of the big changes has been the sort of evolution of BT going kind of into sport much more, and I'd love to hear like why and how that's happened, and kind of what reflections you have on it, because in the space of your career, sport has gone from being almost a part-time occupation for a few people to now being full-time across the board in lots of professions. And also you look at the kind of production values at BT Sport and those things, there's a huge amount of people involved in putting these events together now.
Yeah, I mean it's a fascinating business. it's a very different business to any one we run, and it's a very challenging business because you have these rights, whether it's the Champions League and all of European football that we have exclusively, or Premier League, but they can all be taken away from you in the next auction. So you are living every 2 or 3 years constantly thinking about and worrying about what if we gain that, what if we lost that, what does that mean? So it's an incredibly volatile business compared to when we're building out mobile networks, whether it's 4G or 5G or fiber. Those technologies and pipes in the ground or masts are going to be around for decades.
Right? Yeah.
So it's a very different way of thinking about it, and this is why we did create a joint venture with Warner Brothers and Discovery, because we felt, if you look at the scale and rise of the streaming platforms, whether it's Amazon as an example, could Netflix come into sport one day? Could Twitter come into sport one day in a big way? Could Apple? Could Google? Could Meta? Quite possibly, I think, as well as Sky and all of the other players that are out there. So it's a very, very competitive business, going through huge change, and increasingly now the days, as anyone who's a sports fan will know this, the days of just tuning in at 2:00 or 4:00 on a Sunday afternoon and sitting in front of one game for an hour and a half are gone.
Yeah.
And we see millions of customers double, triple screening, particularly on a Champions League night, and there's big games on. There's people on iPads watching 1, 2, 3 games at a time, switching between them whilst they've got the TV on. So keeping up with those digital trends, creating digital experiences that really work for customers, knowing and understanding and playing to the audience that does love tuning in for a live game as well, and keeping on top of particularly the younger audience. I've got children myself, and it's yeah.
What's the future of how people engage with sport? Like you say, it's changed a lot in the last 10 years. People watching 2, 3 screens a night on the Champions League, etc. What do you think the next sort of 10 to 15 years will bring on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it depends on the audience as well. Because if I think about how young people consume
anything, non-sport,
anything,
yeah.
Sports part of that, and I think if you are a football club or cricket club, or you're dealing with an audience now that has significantly less attention span, tolerance to invest a huge amount of time in watching anything or participating in anything unless it's a really good experience. And so changes in the way the game need to think about the audience, I think, are coming. I mean, if you look at football, for example, how you think about the time that the ball's in play, and what how do you deal with all of this time wasting issues and perhaps shorten the game, and all those kind of things are really interesting questions. And the way cricket's under pressure because no one's got the patience to watch 5-day tests anymore under the age of 30, and so on and so forth. So I think there's changes coming probably in the way sport thinks about the game and the rules, and to appeal to those audience. I think there's potentially fundamental changes coming to the way rights holders, clubs in particular, think about the opportunities to engage with those audiences. And there's so many opportunities now because of the fact there's a smartphone or a tablet in everyone's pocket or handbag or rucksack. The way in which you can extend your reach now without needing to be in the stadium with your fan base, and really thinking about fans as subscribers and customers rather than just people that turn up to a stadium once in a while, I think give so many opportunities to create new experiences and new content. And that creates a really interesting dynamic when you think of streaming platforms and content distributors like ourselves, and how we think about the content and what's available from us versus what's available directly from the club. So there's so many things I think about to change, along with faster networks that can do more things in more places, and mixed reality. And can you now, it's a couple of clubs already experimenting with this, where you can buy a seat in a virtual stadium and have the same view as if you were in the stadium? And what price do you price that ticket at? And can you buy a limited number of seats in a virtual 60,000 stadium?
So which clubs are experimenting with that?
I think Manchester City, I know, are experimenting as one of the clubs as an example. So although it can be a bit of a hype word, but the metaverse, the mixed reality, the ability to put yourself actually as if you were there in a digital environment with those views, or would you pay £2,000 to sit next to Pep Guardiola and hear what he's saying and see what he's seeing from his eyes? All of those opportunities are coming.
Yeah.
And so I think that's incredibly exciting for sports fans.
And what other changes could happen? I mean, you talk about some exciting things, because cricket is one that has innovated a huge amount, right, in the last sort of 15 to 20 years and so on. Football has stayed pretty much relatively the same, right? It's still the same format, same number of players. Do you see any changes there that could be interesting?
Well, I think there's increasing focus and an increasing movement now around the time the ball's in play and the level of inconsistency that there is between games and referees. And if you look at, I think rugby's a good example. Why can't you hear what the referee's saying? Why can't you hear what the VAR team are saying? What's there to hide? And because you can't hear it, it feels like there's no accountability. And because it feels like there's no accountability, there's no trust. And when there's no trust, this is what really upsets fans. So I think there's, and then why is it when it says a minimum of 3 minutes are going to be played of added time and the whistle blows at 2 minutes 30?
Yeah.
And everyone's got a clock. And why isn't the clock visible to everyone?
Yeah.
So the transparency or the lack of transparency there is on those kind of things, I think people just won't tolerate anymore as an experience. So I think there's going to be a lot more transparency, a lot more accountability, and a lot more focus on consistency so the game gets fairer.
Yeah, and no, it's really interesting. When it comes to joint ventures that you talk about, how does one go about sort of structuring something like that, and who sort of approaches who, and how do these sort of kind of mega deals take place?
Yeah, I mean they sound very glamorous that when they get done, don't they? These massive multi-billion pound deals, and then the reality is it normally comes down to two people who have a shared vision of where they want to get to and trust each other and feel like they can get a win-win for their organization and the other organization ultimately. So on this one, for example, we have quite often you have advisors. They can be banks or advisory banks that will go and talk on your behalf to a number of interested companies, and in this case there were a dozen or so big media companies that may want to create a joint venture in sport, and then you have some conversations, you present the business and help them understand it, and then after a while you end up with a small number of players and then some much more detailed conversations, and then you end up figuring out whether you can actually make this work from a business point of view as well as a cultural fit. And the bit that's often underestimated, I think, is the importance of people in that. Ultimately, if you're in something like a joint venture where you are effectively sharing your revenues, sharing your costs, sharing your teams and sharing your business plan together, it's incredibly important that you can look across the table to the other team and feel like these are people I can work with for a number of years. So that's been a really important thing for me and the team in doing this one.
What skills are required in that? Because I can imagine sort of, a 16-year-old Jimmy McLaughlin listening to this and thinking, gosh, that sounds like a cool room to be in from a kind of consumer, from like a career point of view, rather. What skills are required in that sort of cultural fit that you talk about there?
I think a lot of empathy, the ability to really listen to what someone's saying, because ultimately, if you're trying to get a deal done or any transaction or sell something or buy something, ultimately The power and skill of listening to what someone's really saying is important to them.
Yeah.
Is one of the most important things you can do. And in the end, I think quite often you can get these incorrect perceptions of what good deals look like, and everyone's sort of high-fiving and clapping and saying, we won. But actually, it's got to work for both sides. It always does.
Yeah.
Because if you do a deal that you feel great about, but the other side feels terrible about, in the end, it comes back to bite you.
Yeah.
It always does. So that point of, I think, empathy, listening, and then thinking about how to address what the other side wants whilst balancing what you want, is a really important skill.
Yeah. Well, it's the clues in the name, isn't it? Joint venture, right? It's got to work for both sides. There are lots of different campaigns that you've worked on as part of it, the sort of evolution of sport, etc. Hope United kind of being one. What is the role of a company like BT when it comes to campaigns like that?
Yeah, so Hope United was a really important platform for us to make a really important stance on what we felt were a number of really important issues in society and in sport, and using the power of sport and the power of some of the voices that we had access to speak about racism and sexism and recently homophobia in sport. So we created a Hope United platform, a group of like-minded, talented individuals who could talk about it. And I think companies now and leaders now, I think, are under so much more pressure from consumers and colleagues and employees to have a point of view on what's going on in society, to take action, to speak about it, to take a stance, way more so than I can ever think about in my career. It wasn't something that leaders or businesses really got that involved in, but now I think it's a fundamental part of what people are expecting from you. And I think with an organisation of our scale and size and impact, we feel and have, I think, a bigger level of responsibility than most organisations to be a really powerful voice on some of these really important issues.
And as a CEO, how do you're responsible P&L, shareholders, etc., consumers, employees, those additional sort of areas where you're right, the demands are being made on businesses. We talked about consumers being a lot more kind of vocal on some of these issues. How do you go about working through the sound of what's important and what's not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the hardest things about my job, I think, and anyone's job like mine that's got what I would call a multi-stakeholder group that's incredibly complex, and you've listed them all out. We've got shareholders, customers, regulators, consumers, colleagues, wider society, a responsibility in the communities we're in, even beyond the employees we have and the customers we have in those areas, I think, because we feel like a very responsible part of the UK society and economy. And so I quite often have this wheel written out when I'm making big decisions. So what is the impact of this on shareholders, colleagues, customers, any regulatory impacts, society, community, and you just got to work it through. And the hard thing, of course, is you'll never be able to make a decision and please everybody. You've got to make these balanced choices, balanced decisions ultimately. And sometimes some of those stakeholder groups feel like you could have done a better job for them. But over the course of 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years, that's what you've got to be looking to achieve. Is a great business, I think, has a really balanced outcome across all of those dimensions, and ultimately everyone understands that you're looking out for them, and you can't do something that pleases them all the time. But if your customers are feeling good, and your shareholders are feeling good, and your colleagues are feeling good and better every year about what you're doing, then you feel like you're making progress and momentum.
Yeah. So given all that, what made you want to be a chief exec?
I'm not sure I ever, particularly in the early stages of my career, ever said, I must or I want to be. I mean, I think I always had the ambition to lead a company.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that came from. It was certainly in the early stages of my career. I always felt I had the ambition to lead a company, lead a brand, do things the way I wanted to do them. I don't know where it came from. I certainly didn't specifically say I want to be the chief executive of a massive division in a telecoms company, but the ambition to lead has always been there, I think, through the very early phases of my career.
And technology's always been there, right? Because you sort of started off in Sega, right? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I've been incredibly lucky just to be part of incredible industries. The video gaming industry, when I was in it in early stages, I was involved with the various Nintendo launches, then went to Sega at an incredible time where we launched an online games console, which was the first time ever an online games console that was launched, and unfortunately it launched without a broadband network to power the online games console. So it was a fundamental flaw. We had power but no broadband network, and so I suppose it's sort of interesting that I've ended up at the UK's largest infrastructure provider to sort of maybe try and fix these things. But it was a very pioneering time in video games and an amazing time, and Microsoft were just coming in with the Xbox, and PlayStation were building. So, and obviously Nintendo were pretty strong. But it was a time where games still came in boxes and cassettes and cartridges and things, and obviously that industry has changed beyond all recognition. But I think some of the most enjoyable work experiences for me were just being involved in a launch like that. It's very rare you get the chance to launch a brand or a product that's as big and as meaningful as that, and touches as many consumers and gets you and your customers as excited as things like that. And I've just been lucky. I managed to have 2 or 3 of those experiences in my career, and many people never get to do that. They never get to launch a brand. Most people just inherit a brand. You go and work for Coca-Cola, you're not really going to change the Coca-Cola brand or Sainsbury's, or these are brands that have been in the market forever. And I've been lucky enough to launch big new products or brands from scratch in my career, and they've been the most enjoyable experiences that I've been part of.
And what would your what were you thinking when you headed into those industries at that age? Was it just, sort of video games is cool, I'd quite like to work in that, I'll get any job that I can, or was it more thought through and structured than that?
It certainly wasn't very thought through and structured. I mean, one of my early experiences was working for a company called Olivetti in Italy, and they were an incredible organization, largely non-existent now, but they were pioneers in computers and computing. They started with typewriter. The Olivetti founder founded the typewriter, for example, and my bosses there basically said to me, "You've got to learn about distribution and sales, because we're great at design, we're great at innovation, but we just can't sell." Which, when I think about it, because they were the marketing organization, quite often that's the accusation that marketing throw at sales, and then sales will often throw back, well, our marketing's not good enough and customers don't understand what we're selling. But that got me into sales and distribution. A huge entertainment distributor at the time that was selling music and video games and books and videos, when all of these things came in physical form all over the world. And it was just a brilliant time to be in those industries. The music industry was flying, the games industry was growing at an exponential rate, film and video was incredible. And when I look at those industries now and the level of change that they've been through, it's absolutely amazing. And nobody, when I was working in those industries at that time, was ever talking about or thinking about the level of disruption that technology was going to bring to them. It's been absolutely dramatic. So, no, I think I was attracted because of the industries are exciting. I mean, some people never get to work in industries as exciting as that. But for me, I'd always loved music, loved film, loved gaming. And so to be at the heart of all of that was just, it was a dream, really. It didn't really feel like work.
Yeah.
It was great fun. It was hard work, but it was very enjoyable.
What is your favourite video game?
GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64
Classic.
can never be beaten. I know all these online games are all very exciting, but GoldenEye on the N64.
Yeah, they really did crack that. Like, it's not very. I mean, it's interesting now, sort of seeing The Last of Us sort of go to kind of television screen, but that is one of the few adaptations of a film into a game that
yes
did really well. Right?
Yeah, I agree. Many of them don't.
Yeah,
and I never understand why the publishers don't sort of translate the great films into the games. But you're right, GoldenEye is an absolute classic. Yeah.
What does the future of jobs look like? I mean, like we've been talking about, you were right there at the sort of vanguard of some of these very exciting industries in the 90s. When you look at the future of work and the future of jobs, what do you see it for the next 20 or 30 years being the kind of key skills that are required?
Well, I think one of the most important things, I'm not sure necessarily it's a skill, but just being flexible. Being adaptable, being open to change and open to learn, because like anything, I think the pace of change just keeps picking up and up and up, and we genuinely, none of us, I mean, there may be one or two very bright or lucky people can predict what the next 5-10 years is going to look like. But what we do know is that technology and networks and the way customers consume content and technology and experiences and new pieces of hardware that come from out of nowhere, like the iPhone did back in 2007, will fundamentally change the way we live, work, entertain ourselves.
Yeah.
And I can't predict, and as I said, most people won't be able to predict that, but what we can predict is loads of change. And so I think when you're thinking about coming into work, or even if you're in work, building your career at the moment, just getting your head around the fact that there's going to be loads of change coming, and that's okay, because everyone else is also going to go through that. And there's lots of people who say they love change, but most people really don't like change. And you got to embrace that and lean into that. And learning new skills is a really, really important thing. And there's lots of studies going around what colleagues, what employees want now, and learning new skills is as important as pensions and healthcare for a lot of people now, because they recognise the need for them to adapt. And it doesn't matter what stage of your career you're at, you are always learning, and you need to learn, because everything around you is changing and the consumer's changing. So you can't just keep working the way you've always worked with the same tools, same technology. Everything's changing.
As one of the biggest employers in the UK, you touched on something really interesting there about what people want, and that skill development is really interesting to hear that. Post-pandemic and kind of working in offices, etc., where do you see the future of that sort of heading? Yeah, we're sort of in to use the term, we're in a new normal now where flexibility is happening. Do you think people should be back in the office more, or where do you think that's going to end up?
I think everyone's trying to figure this out, and there's no right or wrong answer here. I mean, I think it's wonderful, the flexibility, or certainly increased flexibility, that there is now for people. And I think back to when I was a young parent, trying to bring up my 3 young children, and all of the demands between myself and my wife and the childcare, and trying to be in 3 different places at once, whilst having to be in the office 9 to 5 or 8 till 8, Monday to Friday. And the number of sports days and parents' evenings and shows and things I missed. I think it's wonderful now that there is that flexibility for people who work in my team and other companies to be able to juggle more effectively home life and work life, and more of us are caring for parents and children at the same time. So there's huge pressures, I think, on people, and we know that childcare is difficult to get access to, and it's more and more expensive. So I think the flexibility is brilliant, and we really embrace that, and it's a huge part of what we enable as well. So we're big enthusiasts about it. However, I also recognise, and I can see it in how teams perform, that being in the office and it's not necessarily about. I think the office is a distraction from people being together. So there's too much of a dialogue, I think, about the office versus home, and it's not. It's about teams being together, build more trust, learn better together, learn off each other, help and support each other brilliantly, build great relationships, and particularly if you're in your 20s and 30s, I think, where you're trying to accelerate your career growth. If I think of what were the biggest influences on me, it was spending time with watching my boss or bosses or people I really respected, having mentors, people bumping into me in the corridor. Sometimes it can just happen like that. Have you heard there's a new job going in da-da-da department?
Yeah.
Have you heard so-and-so's leaving? Or have you heard so-and-so's upset? Or all of those things you just don't get if you're out of the office all of the time. And I do worry about, I feel I have a responsibility to pass on as much of the learnings I have by being present, people being able to see, hear, understand, get a feel for what I'm thinking about, and give a nudge of advice to someone if I can. I think people are really missing out if they're not present. And so and we can see in the teams that are easier to measure, and this is a hard one because knowledge workers, it's very hard to measure output. It's very easy to measure a customer service advisor or a retail advisor or sales. But you can certainly see on the more measurable roles, people are more productive when they're together.
Yeah. We
can see that 10 to 15% more productive. So that data shows us that. It's much harder measuring a more sort of more of a corporate role where you're measuring decisions and outcomes that can take years for you to assess. But I'm sure that's also true. Creative meeting, that we have better ideas when we're together. It's easier to communicate to different people when you're together. So I think it's a balance, really.
Yeah.
Is the key, and it's not a binary thing that people get caught up in. And we're more on we should be in more often than you're not, but we want you to have the flexibility so you can balance all the things that are going on in your life.
Do you think these sort of the corporate HQ, I mean, BT, sort of adorns the London skyline, but do you think we'll almost see more satellite offices then, or not even offices, right, to fall into your language, but satellite spaces where people might get together?
I think so, and I think, certainly what we're trying to do is we have offices and service centres all over the country.
Yeah, cool.
And I think it's really important for companies like ours to have a distributed workforce, to not rely on central London as the only place where you can hire digital talent or data scientists, because it's incredibly competitive as a market, and relatively disloyal in the sense that people move around, and companies much more often in an environment like London or Manchester, for example, big cities. So we're trying to reskill a lot of our service teams who are all over the country into new roles, and keep them in the service centres, whether it be in Plymouth or Dundee or the Northeast, all over the country, Wales, Cardiff, Merthyr. So those people can have great careers, they can reinvent themselves. But we also have great talent all over the UK. And when we think about serving 25 million customers, we're the biggest customer business in the country. We need people who understand all parts of the country. And I think a London-centric corporate office is not the only answer to that.
Totally. What is you talked about it there a bit, sort of the moments in corridors and so on. What were the moments that you caught the brakes in your career, and how would you advise somebody in the modern world trying to do that?
Yeah, I mean the biggest breaks came to me from people, obviously, but so having the broadest network you possibly can, building great relationships. When I think back to the break I had at Sega, for example, this was the person who ran Sega. I was effectively I used to buy their products to then distribute them on, and we'd built a really great relationship. And so that person then said, "Would you like to come and work for Sega?" And so building great relationships, listening to people in terms of what they want, having empathy with them, building that real sense of trust means you'll be seen as someone that people want in their team.
Yeah.
So I think they've come from having built great relationships, certainly, and then I think the influence that bosses have. If I think over my career, there's probably 3 or 4 bosses, and I haven't had loads of bosses actually. There's been 3 or 4 that have just been fundamentally critical, I think, in giving me the opportunities, trusting in me, giving me the increased responsibility, and I always say to people, interview your next boss as much as they're interviewing you, because they are probably in your 20s and 30s like the most important determinant for your future career, your future platform, the opportunities you're going to get or not get, your sense of well-being. They're just so fundamentally important, and I've just been lucky and attracted to brilliant people that have given me those opportunities. The Sega one was a good example, but also I also took risks to go to certain situations where at the time the job on paper you wouldn't necessarily take it. So what I mean by that is I moved to Sega when there were about 3 people in the building, because video games consoles are such a peak and a trough business, and they were just basically on the end of the Mega Drive, which you probably remember, and then gearing up. But there was going to be a quiet period for a couple of years where my team was me, and the job was really sell off a few old Mega Drive cartridges, but get ready for this next console, which was going to be a career-defining moment for me and a life-defining moment, I think, in terms of the enjoyment and experience that I got from it. But on paper, that job wouldn't look very interesting. No team, no status. You know, if you're just thinking about that in terms of ego, not very attractive. But seeing the opportunity of being at the start of launching the next Sega video console was just something too good to miss. I did the same when I moved to Hutchison, which became 3. I think I was the 15th employee sitting in an office, and we had a piece of paper that said we've got a 3G license and we're going to launch a new mobile phone network. There were no masts, there was no IT, there was no technology, there was nothing. It was just a bunch of people talking about how we're going to do it. No team, no status. Again, on paper, you'd say, but being at the start of launching a brand new mobile operator in the UK at the time when mobile was still exploding, fantastic opportunity. So,
trying to assess opportunity.
I think look beyond the how many people work for me and what's the salary and what's the grade and all this kind of stuff that people get obsessed about. Even internally, you quite often get this in companies, you know, obsessing about grade or title, rather than what's the job.
Yeah.
What will happen with that job, and which department or situation you're moving into, and in years 1, 2, and 3, what are you going to experience? And picking that, you know, it's a bit like, you know, a lot of people might not have moved to Tesla from Ford for that very reason a number of years ago, and now probably living to regret that. So it's you can't pick them right all the time.
Yeah.
And some of them are easier to pick. But I think taking those risks and being in early at periods of high growth or high change and high transformation you'll have the most fun, you'll learn the most about yourself and others, you'll be tested more than anywhere else, and ultimately, I think for me, have been defining foundation moments in my career, certainly.
A few quick fires.
Yep.
Favourite football team?
I say this with a heavy heart at the moment, Liverpool.
Oh, yeah. We're talking the day after they've been knocked out of the Champions League.
Yes.
Real Madrid. Favourite sporting moment? I'm going to ask you this too. Favourite sporting moment that you would like to have witnessed from history, and then favourite one of recent years?
Wow. I think watching Maradona in his prime when they won the World Cup, I'd like to have been there. I watched it on the telly, but actually being there in person would be pretty amazing. Haven't watched this documentary and the whole story around that. What was the other one? The one
favorite one
if
from
I could
recent
relive.
years.
Well, for me, I mean, as non-Liverpool fans would be groaning, but the Istanbul final.
Yes.
3-0 down and thinking it was all over at half time and planning the exit to the airport early and all that kind of stuff, and then deciding to stay, and probably the best decision I've ever made in a football stadium ever, I think.
I'd say one of my favourite things of when I really fell in love with audio, I've said this a few times on the podcast, but is when the Liverpool game, we just moved house, we were unpacking everything, so I basically just got it on the radio, and it was the game where Liverpool pulled it back in the second leg, and just listening to the cop at full time was...
Oh, the Barcelona game?
Yeah, was incredible. That was
I was at that game. But I think Istanbul trumps it because it was a final.
Yeah. No,
but that was an unbelievable evening as well, the Barcelona, yeah.
If you get, what would be your dream job, if non-corporate job?
I mean, I think one day I would like to run a charity. I think that has a meaningful impact for lots of people less fortunate than me.
Interesting. And what was your first experience of business entrepreneurship? Were you one of these people that was setting up a tuck shop in school?
Well, we put on discos and parties and hired out venues and sold tickets and things like that. We never made any money, but it was great fun.
Still learned a lot doing it though, right?
Still learned a lot doing it, absolutely, about costs and revenue and how many friends you let in with a free pass versus those that should have paid.
Yeah. Mark, thanks so much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Thanks very much.
It's heavy.
Great being here.